Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for The Fire Alarm, released in 1935. It's the 119th in the series and it's directed by Jack King. This short has been fully restored. However, at the time of this recording, there's no physical media release yet, and hopefully that will change at some point. It is under copyright. I can't show the full thing here on YouTube unless Warner Brothers themselves choose to upload it on their own channel. And given how this short is kind of weird and bland all at the same time, I highly doubt they will, but you never know, they might. In case you haven't seen this one, we're back to Beans, and this time round he's a fireman, and one day his nephews Ham and X arrive, and they cause all sorts of shenanigans at the fire station, including taking one of the fire engines out for a joyride. Not really too much to this one, but based on what I've told you, this actually leads to an interesting point in regards to the trivia for this short. Because if you just watch this short, it's not particularly great, and I'll go through why in just a moment, but this unintentionally would lead to Jack King doing something very interesting over at Disney. So at this point, Jack King has a few shorts left. He leaves the Schlesinger Studios because, from what I read, they wouldn't allow him to do any of the color shorts. He ends up at Disney, and he ends up making color shorts while he's there. And in directing Donald Duck, one of the shorts is the first appearance of Donald's nephews. So if you watch this short and that Donald Duck short side by side, it plays out almost the same. You've got an uncle who gets these nephews and they just cause mischief, much to the annoyance of the main character. So yeah, this unintentionally led to something bigger and greater over at Disney, and I've always maintained Jack King was a way better director at Disney. I'm not saying he's the best director Disney ever had, but at least his work was far more competent over there. Between this short and the rest of the shorts that would come out before he leaves, they are definitely on the weird and or bland side, but we got to do them all. We got to explore all 1000 Looney Tunes, and these are unfortunately part of it. This short also has some interesting stuff in the background, so as I go through it, I will certainly point out some names or point out some things within, but let's take a look at this short from start to finish and go through why this short is both weird and bland at the same time. So as we open up, I do like the musical score, how we hear the dings, showcasing that, hey, we're going to be at a fire station. But it's interesting how it says in the beginning, Ham and X, so we're at that period of time, and this is more for those who might have encountered this review just out of the blue, as opposed to some of the more popular ones, but anyway, we're at this point in time where the Schlesinger studio was in a bit of a flux. So they introduced Buddy, who was a massive failure. And so they tried all these new characters in the short I Haven't Got a Hat. And the studio put all this stock on Beans. And Beans had also been matched with Porky. Get it? Porky and Beans, ha ha. But what ended up happening was Porky ended up being the funnier character and the more interesting character, and he ended up becoming the Schlesinger Studio's main star of the 1930s, while every other character that was from I Haven't Got a Hat had ended up being retired. So Beans was one of them. But Ham and X were these other characters where, in I Haven't Got a Hat, they were the ones that sung the title song, and they didn't really have any personality to speak of. So in this short, they're now these troublemaking kids, and Beans is no longer a student like in I Haven't Got a Hat, and here is a fully grown professional fireman, I guess. But if you look at the first shot, we've already got some stuff in the background there. So we see Norm's Roadhouse. So that's most likely a reference to the musician Norman Spencer. And you can see Brown's frying pans, dictionaries, and birdseed, which is kind of an odd thing to see, but anyway. So that is likely a reference to Bernard Brown, who was involved with the music as well, and even directed a short, and he was an editor and so on. So one of the big differences between the composer here, Norman Spencer, and later on when Carl Stalling comes into the picture is how Carl Stalling liked to use a lot of musical puns. Yes, he did original stuff, but he would always use musical puns, and that would come from the fact that he was involved with silent films and playing them in the theatre houses. Norman Spencer, however, does a lot of original tunes, and it appears that the musical theme that you hear all throughout this short is an original piece. And it's even sung by Ham and X as, "Oh, we like to fool the firemen." So it's interesting to see the different musicians' takes on composing these shorts. So we see Beans, and he's cleaning up his fire engine in a very long shot. Actually, that shot takes way too long, in my opinion. But it looks like they just did some drawings and they just kept on doing that in a loop. I don't know why they needed to stretch it out, but in any case. So we see our troublemakers, Ham and X, although we don't know that they're troublemakers just yet if you haven't seen this short. So they're going down the street. We go past the grocery store, which also sells candy cigars, which we can't really have anymore. But what's more interesting is that we see the Opry House advertising East Lynne. And this is interesting. I actually looked into this because I was curious about it, and that's a reference to a play that's adapted from a novel, East Lynne. And it was a very popular play, apparently. And it became a bit of a punchline where theatres that would have poorly received plays, there would be this punchline where they'll say, next week, East Lynne, because of how popular it was, to try and, I suppose, cheer people up and say, hey, we've got something better for you next time round. But no, I hadn't heard of that before. And if you guys have seen that punchline used before, definitely let me know in the comments below, because I'm definitely curious about that. And we see King's Corn Cake. Ooh, I'm starting to feel like Krusty the Clown, where he's doing the whole Krusty comedy classic in the beginning at the Apollo Theatre. And yeah, I'll say no more, but that would indeed be a reference to Jack King, the director, but yikes. In any case, they're going down the footpath, and I'm loving all these little incidental characters that they go past. There's just something about those designs I really loved. The whole early to mid-30s character designs that you would see in a lot of these shorts. But they end up at the fire station. So we see the two characters saying, Uncle Beans, Uncle Beans. Now, interestingly, I would have thought that they would have had just the one voice actor doing Ham and X, given that they're twins. But according to Keith Scott's wonderful Cartoon Voices book, one of them, Ham, is voiced by Bernice Hansel, who is well known for doing those really cutesy voices that you would hear in a lot of shorts in the 1930s. And Shirley Reed would do X. Now, Shirley Reed, the name may not sound familiar to you, but she was the original voice of Petunia Pig. He's not sure who does the voice of Beans, but he's got a question mark on Bernard Brown, the person I mentioned earlier. So Beans gets the note, Uncle Beans, please take care of Ham and X, have gone shopping, signed Lizzie. Who is Lizzie? We don't know, and we never will. But that's okay. So again, it's a similar thing to what Jack King would do later on with Donald and his nephew, where it's an uncle looking after the nephews, but the nephews run amok. Now this is one of those unintentional chuckles at these Jack King shorts, because sometimes he'll just do one really weird directorial choice. So he puts down the note, and Bean's doing these really weird quizzical expressions like he has no clue. But it comes across that he's read the note and doesn't understand what the note's trying to tell him. It's really bizarre. But he brings them in and he still looks kind of quizzical. I do like that jumping animation that the kids ended up doing in there, but Beans, I guess, just walks off and just lets Ham and X do their own thing. And first up, the two end up fighting over the hat. I mean, as siblings tend to do, but one ends up going into a fire boot. Now, mind you, I didn't even know the difference between Ham and X here, so don't ask me, okay? Because they're just so generic. But I do like the animation of one of them trying to pull out the boot from the other's face. The problem is some of the timing here just doesn't feel particularly snappy. It's not terrible, mind you, but compared to what Tex Avery had done fairly recently in his debut short for Warner Brothers, yeah, this is definitely lacking in comparison. But we have some more time wasting, so the other pup ends up getting that boot, but he gets rid of it pretty quickly, and the two look at each other and start dancing. And again, this has been a problem with a lot of the Jack King shorts of late. You just have these gags, but none of them really lead to anything, and there's just no real snappy timing. It's just bizarre. It's as though at the time Jack King had weaker writers coming up with these shorts, but because he wasn't exactly an ambitious director, at least at this point in time, he did some ambitious stuff in the beginning, like with Buddy's Bearcats with those weird angles and such, but at this point it looks like he was just taking whatever was on the board and not really doing anything amazing with it, unlike, say, Tex Avery, who would be such a perfectionist that he would time gags by the frame. In any case, they go to the fire engine, they see the hose rewind. One of them ends up pulling out the axe, and the other grabs the hose, mumbles some gibberish. I can barely even hear what they're saying. And as you'd expect, ends up tangling the entire fire engine. Again, it's pretty ho-hum, there's not really much to it here. It just goes on and on for way too long. But one of them pushes the hose rewind, and while the gag isn't funny, listen closely to the sound effect here, because this is something that Treg Brown, who was around at the time, he was doing the sound effects, and that sound effect might sound very familiar if you're a fan of a certain devil, a Tasmanian one, if you will. But one of them ends up knocking into Beans, who's still cleaning up the fire engine, and clearly not paying attention to the fact that his nephews could be hurt. The other one runs up towards Beans, ends up slipping and falling onto a sponge. Riveting, isn't it? And so Beans is not happy and makes them sit on a bench. I gotta say, that image in the corner, that perhaps a fire chief or whoever, looks kind of creepy. I do like a lot of these weird backgrounds that you see in these sort of shorts. So Bean simply says for them to keep quiet, so I guess maybe he wouldn't be much of a parent if he was to have kids or whatever.
Quiet!
But there's another sound effect that you hear that Bob Clamper would end up using a lot in his shorts, so see if this sounds familiar to you. It's interesting hearing these little bits that end up becoming a lot more used later on in much better shorts than this one. But Ham and X, of course, they're naughty kids. They are clearly up to more mischief, but we're about halfway in the short and nothing really of notice happens. You just have them at this fire station causing some mischief that's not really timed well and it isn't particularly funny, but you'd hope that at least the last half of the short will be interesting. And I will admit, the second half is definitely better, especially once they get into that fire engine. So the boys trigger the fire alarm, and the firemen who are sleeping upstairs wake up, and obviously they think it's an emergency. I do like the date that's on that board there. It's the fireman's ball, but it's October 31st. Kind of weird. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to be. But of course, their pants are alive and they get into place, and the boys are ready for action. But the fact that they got ready so quickly, it's kind of impressive. Now, looking at the background, I was thinking if that pyrene is a reference to anything. I know pyrene refers to like this pump fire extinguisher that was around, so I don't know if it's reference to that or if there's a college with a similar name, so if you have an idea of that reference, definitely let me know. But again, it's not a gag that's particularly funny here, so you just got this other fireman just breathing away and his nose is getting bigger, and that's pretty much it. So again, there's not really much to it here. But as is in a lot of Jack King shorts, a piece of clothing comes alive and tries to wake up this fireman. Again, as I said before, this is both a mixture of bland and just outright bizarre. So the firemen get into the fire truck with Beans as the driver, and if you look in the background, you can see a reference to Warner Brothers, which is like a parody of Warner Brothers. I do like the animation of the truck taking off, so that it has to sort of rev up that little bit. So it's like the car's alive. Ham and X are all excited about what they've actually done, and I don't think they've realized that raising false alarms like that is a massive no-no. And they sing the song which, again, the melody of which is being played all throughout this short.
La la, ho ho ho, watch the engines how they go. Oh, how we like to fool the firemen. Sirens squeal, ain't it real? We can't tell you how we feel. Oh, how we like to fool the firemen.
I wonder if Norman Spencer just wrote this little thing that they ended up singing and then just decided to make a score around that. So I wonder in which way he ended up having that done. Is it really any wonder that Ham and X never really took off? They're just annoying kids and nothing more. There's just nothing really to their personalities here. So what makes these two characters not work, but the Huey, Dewey, and Louie characters work over at Disney? Honestly, you got the novelty of there being triplets would certainly help, and of course much better writers over at Disney with perhaps Jack King's directing sensibilities, but these kids are just annoying and troublemakers, and that's it. That's their entire shtick. Whereas Huey, Dewey, and Louie actually had personalities. Sure, there were, at least at that point in time, they were just basically the same character, just by three, and they caused trouble, but they weren't annoying. Yeah, they were troublemakers, but you went along with it. They were a lot more fun to watch when they were causing trouble, whereas these two, you almost want to do what Beans does at the end of this short, which I don't condone, but you look at these kids, you're like, their mother's not raising them right. But then you see the firemen, they're returning, and they're clearly not happy. I don't know if this is an animation mistake or not, but if you look at Beans, you can see that his face flickers between being nearly all black and part of his mouth being white. So I don't know if that's just the way it was shot or not. But you do have to wonder, though, the alarm went off, but where did they know to go initially? Again, you don't really need to know that, and you can get away with it here, but I just find it kind of amusing. So Beans, no doubt, knows that the boys pulled that fire alarm as a bit of a prank, and he's clearly not happy, and yeah, you sympathize with Beans here, and again, that's probably why the Donald and Huey, Dewey, and Louie shorts are better, because you're more with the nephews than Donald, whereas here you sympathize more with Beans than Ham and X, so that's why this doesn't quite work. So he pulls them by the ear and basically puts them into bed. And he tells them to go to sleep, but these kids look old enough that they don't really need a nap, so he clearly doesn't know what it's like to be a parent.
Now go to sleep.
And all they do is just jump around on the beds and just cause mischief. Again, this isn't particularly funny, but one of them ends up going to the fire pole, and if you look very closely, there's another weird date joke there, which is for the horseshoe tourney, September 19th. At least the number makes more sense. And they both just randomly decide, you know what, let's just take this fire truck for a joyride. That is definitely an escalation, because up until this point, all they're doing is just these minor pranks. Yes, I know, you shouldn't do a false alarm with the fire alarm and such, but at least everything was fairly minor. But here they decide to take the fire truck. We see Beans looking through the toolbox and then realizing that the fire truck has gone, which is somehow so strong that it ends up going through the brick wall without injuring Ham and X. Again, the timing of it is just so weird. There's just no real energy to it. It's as though Jack King just gave up on directing at this point, which I'm almost certain he pretty much did. And Beans, for whatever reason, tries to stop the fire truck by standing in front of it. I mean, that's not particularly smart. I get it, you want to try and stop it, but why would you step in front of it? I don't know. But if you look to the left, you can see Griff's grill, and it's believed that that is a reference to Griff J, who was a background layout artist at the time. And on the right, you have Miller Hair, which looks like it's a reference to Melvin Millar, who was a writer at the time. So Beans is running along and ends up escaping into the sewers. I'm looking at the background and I just wanted to see if there was any references, and nope, it's just all generic names. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but I'd like to see if there's any hidden Easter eggs, but I can tell you now that there isn't. In perhaps the most interesting shot of this whole short is the one shot where you have one of the nephews just driving along, having this incredibly weird look about him, while the other nephew is in the back just swinging along and just smashing through all of these telegraph poles. And gee, this must be some truck being able to destroy all of those telegraph poles like that and without damaging the truck or injuring the passenger there. But this shot is just so weird. It feels so wrong, and yet I just can't keep my eyes off of how ridiculous it looks. But it's basically one cycle where it goes to the right, it hits 3 poles, goes back, hits 3 poles, goes backwards and forwards. It's just one complete cycle that they just repeat over and over again. Yes, they would have to do things to save on costs, to be sure, but because this goes on for a lot longer than it should, you definitely start noticing the pattern. But the truck ends up jackknifing in a way and ends up going through all these bushes, and we even see a really weird looking statue of what appears to be Napoleon on a horse. Why is there a statue of Napoleon on the horse in this town? I don't know, but it's there. and it seemingly even comes alive for a brief moment as it flips around. So it's as though someone's actually alive dressed up as Napoleon in the middle of the street on a horse. And here's another weird shot. So you've got this house and you've got the fire truck approaching in a rather crude looking way. And again, this truck is so strong. In this case, it smashes through the entire house, destroying it, leaving the roof attached to the wires, and one angry person being on the phone. And the scale of this is completely off as well, because this person is a lot more bigger in comparison to what this actual roof is. But that's okay, we'll move on. But hope you guys noticed that too, okay? But as the truck is still going through and is now on the tracks, there is reference to Riley's, and I'm not sure who that's referring to, so if you have an idea, definitely let me know. And that sign that they go through, I wanted to see if there was a reference, but no, it's just your generic billboard sign there. One that they repeat over and over again. Again, to save on costs, I get it, but yeah, it's quite noticeable because they hold on to that shot for way too long. But one of the nephews is looking on in horror as they realize they're about to hit a tram, or perhaps a trolley car, one way or another, because where I live it's trams, and in other places these would be known as trolley cars. But either way, certain sections would be off-road like this, and that's what that is. But if you look in the background, you see Norm's Market. I guess Norman Spencer's a lucky man because he gets two references in this one short. And again, how strong is this fire truck as it smashes right through that trolley car and just causing it to spin with such force? Did I mention that this was a mixture of both bland and weird? I'll admit I had a bit of a chuckle where it ended up being upside down and supported in that really weird shot there. And in a brief, unfunny shot, and hey, at least it's brief, you can see the truck just going through all these nonsense angles on that top-down shot, but it ends up back into the firehouse. So the boys sneak upstairs thinking, yep, they've gotten away with their shenanigans, and thinking, hey, no one's noticed. I mean, I'm sure someone would have noticed with that kind of destruction. I mean, they literally demolished an entire house. Somebody else could have been killed there, but they go upstairs and Beans is looking on and goes to check on the boys. And what's this? He's got his belt out. He definitely means business. But he's not very bright in this short, is he? Because he looks kind of confused yet again. But in one moment where I just laugh because of just how pathetic it is as a gag, I guess it's like an anti-gag of sorts. You got Beans, he's about to leave. The boys could have gotten away with it, and yet one of them just picks up the boot and just throws it at him. Why? It's ridiculous. And the boys end up singing that song like they did before, which again, why? If they wanted to get away with what they've done, but this just shows how unlikable they really are, and that's why these characters never really took off. But we see Beans all pissed off, and pissed off Beans is the best kind of Beans, I have to admit, and he does what no one really should be doing today and ends up spanking their bottoms, because spanking was a very common thing back then, as opposed to dealing with actual proper punishments. So he starts spanking their bottoms, lifts their tails up, continues spanking, and then looks up, breaking the fourth wall, and winks at the audience, and that's that. And we end up with a rather different ending when it comes to That's All Folks. We just see the words written out. So this is the first time that we see this, and they'll do it for a little bit before changing it once again. But that was the fire alarm. Again, this is one of those shorts that isn't particularly great, and it's that weird combination of bland and just outright bizarre. There are so many moments in there that just make you question your reality. It's quite clear that Jack King was not happy being a director here, and the writers weren't the greatest either, at least until Tex Avery rocks up, which he does around this point. So what'll happen is Jack King does a few more shorts and leaves before the so-called quote-unquote Tex Avery effect comes into effect. And Frank Tashlin too. I mean, Frank Tashlin ends up taking over this unit anyway. This one, wow, it's got to be 4 out of 10. It's not particularly good. There's a few things here and there I laughed at, but a lot of the times I'm just laughing at just the ineptness of a lot of it. But in any case, that will do it for this one and 1935. So all of 1935 has now been covered in the form of a review, but now on to 1936, so we've definitely turned a corner. We're now going to have Tex Avery and of course Frank Tashlin. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
La la la, ho ho ho, watch the firemen how they go. Oh, how we like to fool a fireman.